You have really assembled an all-star audience, and so it's a great opportunity for me to speak with all of you and learn from all of you. I also want to thank you, Danielle, and Commissioner Hardy for serving on our Community Advisory Board. At the Minneapolis Fed a year and a half ago, we launched a major new research initiative focusing on economic opportunity and inclusive growth. And while our contribution, we have limited tools. We're at the central bank, we move interest rates up and down, we regulate banks. We do have extraordinary economic research capability. And so this is a research institution, but we wanted to anchor it in the community. And by having the commissioner and Danielle serving on our advisory board, it helps bring a very real world perspective to our work. And so I want to thank you both for serving. We really appreciate it. You know, the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis has a long history of focusing on education. And I see our former research director, Art Rolnick, is here. He's done pioneering work with other colleagues on early childhood education, and I argue has made a real difference in Minnesota and nationally. And we are looking to continue that great legacy, both in early childhood education and in education more broadly. Because as all of you know, I'm preaching to the choir here. I mean, education is our future. It's our future for our families and our communities and our young people. It's the future of our economy, of our competitiveness globally. So many things do come back to education. So I applaud you for focusing on this topic. Now, why does the Fed care? We're the nation's central bank. You know, our jobs that Congress has given us, we talk about a dual mandate, two goals that the U.S. Congress has assigned to us. One goal is stable prices. And what that means is an economy that's not overheating and an economy that's not limping along, kind of steady growth. Think of it that way. The second goal that Congress has assigned to us is maximum employment. Maximum employment, not full employment, maximum employment. That means to me, as many Americans who want to work are able to find jobs. How do we achieve maximum employment? And sometimes these goals can be in conflict. Right now, they don't seem to be in conflict, but sometimes they can be. So sometimes it can be tricky. So we care about this because you know that a big driver of employment outcomes is education. People who have better education and more education have more job opportunities. They have more skills. It's easier for them to find a job, and when recessions happen, they're much less likely to get laid off. So the education input is a direct connection to the job market and to our maximum employment mandate. So while we at the Fed may not be able to control education policy, we care a lot about it because it directly affects as we assess what's happening in the labor market. Now, something is also unique about our central bank, the Federal Reserve, is that Congress decided that it should be spread out around the country. In most countries, the central bank is in the nation's capital and that's it. But Congress said, no, we want our central bank to directly represent the people. So the reason that there's a Minneapolis Fed, the reason that I have my job and the reason that I'm here is because we are here to represent you. We're here to know what's happening in our regional economy and bring this knowledge back to Washington, D.C. when we set monetary policy for the nation. So I spend a lot of my time traveling around our region, meeting with labor groups and workers and businesses and bankers and nonprofits to say, what's happening in the local economy? What are you finding? What are the challenges you're facing? So I can become smarter about that. And then when I go back to Washington, D.C. every 6 weeks and we meet with the Federal Open Market Committee, I can talk about what's happening here in the local economy. So let me share with you some of what we're hearing as I travel around the region. And Danielle mentioned some of this. Everywhere I go, businesses say, we can't find workers. We can't find skilled workers. And I usually say to them, okay, are you raising wages? And usually they say no. And I say, well, maybe you should start there because if you want more of something, you generally have to pay more for it. Well, we're seeing some signs that wage growth is slowly starting to pick up. So the job report came out this morning. Wage growth is now at around 2.7%. So it's slowly picking up. We would have expected stronger wage growth given for how the unemployment rate has fallen. The unemployment rate today is now at 3.8%. It ticked down a little bit this morning, which is roughly a 20-year low. We would have expected stronger wage growth. Before the financial crisis in 2006, we were at around 3.5% wage growth. So wage growth is still low. So first question I ask businesses, are you increasing wages? Second question, they say, well, we can't find skilled workers. I'll say, well, how about you train them yourself? Would you consider that? And something is starting to shift. We're hearing more and more employers saying, you know what? We're willing to train them ourselves. because it's in their own interest. You know, they've been used to putting out the sign that says, I need these 5 skills, sign up, and they'd have 20 people signing up or 50 people signing up. Now that's not happening, so you're starting to see businesses say, hey, we need to take this on our own shoulders, and we need to train them ourselves. Or, you know what, for this job, we don't need to do the drug test for this certain job anymore. We've done it historically, we don't need to for this certain job. Or for this category of job, we don't need to do the background check anymore, even though historically we have. And so you're starting to see businesses take some more ownership of their pipeline and respond. And I think those are all very, very positive things. Other things that we hear is that partnership with education between business is starting to get tighter and is enormously important. You know, when I travel around the district, all around the region, and our district is Minnesota, the Dakotas, Montana, the Upper Peninsula, Michigan, and northwestern Wisconsin, I've heard so many times, we can't find welders. How many times have you heard this? We can't find welders. So last week, I was in the Upper Peninsula, Michigan, visiting a community college, and I was with the president of the community college, and I grabbed her, I pulled her aside, and I said, hey, you need to train more welders, okay? She's like, I know. We doubled the size of our welding program in the last few years, and we got no more students. And so these are really complicated problems, and so part of what I'm learning, and you already know all this, is part of it is cultural, about this mindset that every student needs to get a 4-year degree, that everybody needs to go to college, that certain jobs are prestige jobs, certain jobs are not prestigious jobs. And so changing that cultural mindset and opening people's eyes to the fact that there are some very good jobs out there that don't require a 4-year degree, that offer very good wages and a good lifestyle, but may not be the traditional model that many of us have focused on. So that's another aspect that I hear a lot. And then obviously the demographics of our community are changing dramatically. And you know, I think diversity is great. My parents are immigrants from India. I'm married to an immigrant, but it also complicates the challenges that we all face in bringing all of these immigrant communities and these diverse communities into the workforce. We're trying really hard at the Minneapolis Fed. We have lots of policies that we've adopted in the past couple of years to change our own hiring practices. But I'll tell you, even with the best of intentions and even with the CEO and a leadership team who are pounding the table to make changes, change is slow. And it requires constant effort from the top to try to turn the ship. And you know, we're not going to give up, and we're making progress. I'm just frustrated that we're not making progress as quickly as we would like, but we're going to keep at it. So let me just share 3 other things, and then I'm really looking forward to having a discussion with our esteemed panelists and with all of you, and learning from them and learning from all of you. The 3 observations that I'll offer are, well, 4 observations. One is we're not making progress on the achievement gap. All this activity, let's just be honest with each other. An extraordinary amount of effort is being put in. And if you look at the data, there's no progress. And that's really frustrating for all of you, I'm sure, frustrating for me. And that's what's motivating us at the Federal Reserve to try to do this research, to say, why are these problems so persistent? You know, in America, in good times or bad, African-American unemployment is roughly always twice white unemployment. So if it's a recession and white unemployment is 6, African-American unemployment will be 12. If it's a booming economy and white unemployment is 3, African-American unemployment will be 6. Even if you look college graduate against college graduate, it's the same ratio. Or high school dropout against high school dropout. Why are these gaps so persistent? So that's what's motivating us to try to bring our research capability to bear. But here are some three observations I'll offer you. One is we have to have uncomfortable conversations. I mean, a lot of this comes down to inertia, norms, and changing mindsets. So I'll give you an example. One thing I learned as I've traveled around our region, Minnesota is the birthplace of charter schools. And I have visited some very good charter schools in Minnesota. And I asked them, I said, hey, what's your waiting list? And they said, we don't have a waiting list. I said, how can that possibly be? You know, in New York, the very best charter schools have many times oversubscribed, so they have to do the lottery. And what I've realized is, my conclusion is, in Minnesota, we don't shut down our failing charter schools. So the averages are low. So parents are confused. So they just don't know. They've heard the charters don't work, so they say, we're not going to send our kids to charter schools. When there are some excellent charter schools in Minnesota, and we should be sending more resources to the great charter schools and shutting down the lousy charter schools. That's an uncomfortable conversation, but I think we need to have it. Another example, occupational licensing around the country. It's just spreading like weeds around the country. And what is this? It's all being done under the auspices of safety. Occupational licensing for florists under the auspices of safety. These are barriers to competition. These are people who are in the jobs today who do not want more people in their business. So they convinced the legislature to create occupational licensing requirements. Those are barriers to people getting good jobs, as an example. Second, we need to focus on evidence-based solutions. So this is where I think the Minneapolis Fed has a role to play. A couple weeks ago at a conference we hosted, a professor from Rutgers, I think, presented research on Ban the Box. The Star Tribune wrote about this. So Ban the Box was laws passed in some places, including Minnesota, saying you're not allowed to ask if somebody has a criminal background on the front end of an application. Good intentions, because you don't want to discriminate against people where shouldn't be a barrier to them getting that job. Well, the researchers that the professors did, they said that many employers, because they cannot ask on the front end if somebody has a criminal background, they're just assuming African Americans do. And they're assuming whites don't. And this policy is leading to increased gaps, not reduced gaps. Now, the policy had the best of intentions, but we need to have these uncomfortable conversations, and we need to look at the data and say, are the policies leading to the actual outcomes that we want? And some people aren't going to want to hear it, but we need to be rigorous about our analysis and have these conversations and use analysis to make the decisions. And then last thing I'll just say is, I touched on this earlier, is I do think in terms of education, the tighter connection to the business community, the better. Because I visited a tribal college, I'm not going to say where, and they were telling me about how great their automotive training program was. And I met the president of the tribal college, and she was very proud of their automotive training program. I said, let me see it. So they took me a tour, and I saw the auto lab, and I saw the equipment, and I saw the cars. And I said, where are the students going who get these licenses? Oh, there are no car dealerships on the reservation, so they can't actually work in the auto field. My head wanted to explode when I heard this. So the tighter the connectivity between local businesses and education, the better the bridges, the better, at the end of the day, the goal of education ultimately is to give you life skills, but to get you in that job so that you can provide for yourself, provide for your family, continue to develop your skills, and then ultimately be a great contributor to society and to your community. And so I would just encourage, I know we have business leaders here today, I would just encourage continued partnership with local businesses so that students are getting the skills to meet the needs of their employer, and then everybody wins in those situations. And so this sounds like a downer talk. I don't mean to give a downer talk. I'm just sharing with you the honest, what I'm learning as I travel around the region. And I want to applaud you for focusing on these issues. You're focusing on the right issues. We, the Minneapolis Fed, are going to do our part. So reach out to us. If there are things you think we can do to help, reach out. We want to bring analysis and evidence in a nonpartisan, non-political way to bring to bear to these problems. And so we are thrilled to be here today and to partner with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, President Kashkari, for your insightful remarks that will ground our conversation today. Now I want to introduce our distinguished panelists who will be responding to President Kashkari's comments and engaging in a conversation with him and our audience. Today, we're honored to have the expertise and perspectives of these outstanding representatives from higher education, our corporate sector, state government, and K-12 education. Welcome to Dr. Rassoul Dastmozd, President of St. Paul College. Ben Fowke, Chairman, President, and CEO of Xcel Enery. Shawntera Hardy, Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development. And Cecillia Sadler, Deputy Chief of Academics, Leadership and Learning at Minneapolis Public Schools. So I want to start start by asking each of you to respond to Mr. Kashkari's remarks this morning. So your reaction through your individual lens as to what he shared with us today, or any of the statistics I may have shared in the opening. So let's see who we should go first, and how about President Dastmozd?
I didn't draw the shortest of straw, but good morning and thank you to Achieve Minneapolis and all of our business and industry leaders and our legislative as well as our elected official for being here today. You know, for us, just a little bit of backdrop about St. Paul College. We're about 13,000 students, 64% diverse. What we do, pretty much Minnesota is going to be welcoming within the next 5 years in terms of its workforce. We talk about individuals who are non-white, individuals who are first-generation students are going to joining the workforce. We train on 53 different programs, and I say this not to be flippant, the only thing we don't do is mortuary science. Pretty much anything that you deal with from the morning till the time you go to bed, there are 53 programs that we train: manufacturing, IT, finance, health, business, transportation, construction, skilled trades. So pretty much the gamut of workforce. For us, we have to have tight connections, not only with business and industry, but also from receiving entities that we receive our students. So our students come from high schools, community-based organizations. Some are incumbent workers. Some people have changed their career 3 or 4 times. They're out here to get the 5th or 6th career. So we work very closely with the intake, but also we have to work with business and industry to teach the relevant skills as well as education, both in terms of liberal, fine art, STEM, as well as these 53 different programs that are spread across 6 or 7 different occupational clusters that Deed identified. It's the manufacturing, the IT, the finance, the health, transportation. So we have to have a tightly coupled relationship with business and industry. And the way we do it is every one of our technical programs has what they call technical program advisory. And those are employers. They meet 2 or 3 times a year with the program faculty. They provide internship not only for our students, but also for the faculty members. They give us advice in terms of what should be taught in the curriculum, what type of equipment you need to have. So pretty much when we graduate someone, the onboarding of that student is less than 3 months with the company. Granted that companies they believe in actually employee development, so they can put some effort in that. The other part of it is that programs are evaluated every year. And a part of that evaluation is you have sufficient number of students graduating and getting jobs. This spring that we just passed, we graduated 1,500 students. I can tell you as of today, 85% are placed. That's not bad. Most of our students, we graduated 45 machinists and about 43 of them had jobs. The other 2 or 3 didn't have jobs. It's because of their shifts. So the question is, how do we pivot this relationship and make it much more tighter? It's something we have to keep our eye on the buck all the time. And it's not just machinists, it's the nurses, it's the radiographers, it's the respiratory therapists. You can figure out the gamut of occupational. The other part of it is for faculty. As a part of this program evaluation, they have to participate in 2 or 3 industry visits every year, meaning that they're actually in the industry figuring out what is relevant to be taught in those programs. And the same thing is with our transfer is to have a connection with transferring this institution. Are we really teaching the relevant composition, one composition to U.S. history? That's the liberal arts part of it. But also the other part of the skill, the career technical education is, are we teaching relevant skills, right type of equipment, right type of facility, faculty participating in professional development? So it's an ongoing continuous quality improvement for us. Because ultimately, we take students from point A, deliver them to point D. There is some kind of a sausage making we do in there called education and training, but we have to be able to market our students. And for us, it's not only a business proposition, but also from an equity and inclusion lens. When 64% of your students' body are diverse, we have to be able to get a position for them at the table so they could be retained by the companies. Not only that, but also they would have an opportunity to escalate to different trajectory of their career. So it's not just the first job, it's about the next and the next and the next. Because this is the challenge Minnesota currently is facing. It will continue to face. as our communities are becoming much, much more diverse. So we work also with companies to make sure that they provide those retention incentives for our graduates, because it's not just going to be a revolving door, because there's a ton of resources involved when you hire somebody and you have to retain that individual rather than simply for them to leave. So to answer your question, why is it important? In a nutshell, it's our bread and butter. I don't want to sound like Midwestern, but I've lived here long enough. It's our bread and butter. These are our stakeholders. These are our customers. But also we have a moral obligation to teach the right skill set. When we take a student's tuition, we have to make sure that we teach the right skills and provide those students an opportunity to be employed. So we have a very active career placement office that works with the students in terms of resume prep, interviews, job posting, so we can figure out this onboarding. Also, we have a tight connections with businesses who come and actually interview students and talk to graduates. So pretty much faculty are at the center of this thing. And we work very closely with these businesses because ultimately, I say, these are our bread and butter. The other part of it is that we have a tight relationships with community-based organizations. A lot of our students are coming from community-based organizations, the International Institute, YWCA, Neighborhood House, name it, Goodwill Easter Seal. So we have these pathways that we grant some college credits for their training, but also escalate the training to the next level and take advantage of their support services that they provide. Because at times, they're much more culturally competent. There are 53 different languages spoken on campus. I cannot tell you that we're fully culturally competent, but we can take advantage of the resources these community-based organizations provide in terms of cultural competencies, networking, connections, so forth, so on. So work very closely in terms of making the student's journey a success. The average age of a student at St. Paul College is 26. We have students who are 16 years old. We have students who are 70 years old. So that broad spectrum of open access. And not only St. Paul College, but there are 24 of us in this state. I want to put a plug also for Minnesota State. I want to make sure that our business and industries know that we're open for business. We talk a lot about workforce shortage, but I want to challenge all of you and encourage all of you to reach closer to the community and technical colleges near you. We are at your backyard. There are about 11 of us in here. We serve 150,000 students. That's a lot of students. 75,000 of those are in technical career education. So when we talk about those tightly coupled relationships, I think some of these dent about workforce shortage could be dealt with. The other part of it is the wage stagnation. Absolutely right. The growth is not there. When we're competing with fast food, with service industries, and they're paying $15 an hour or $17 an hour, why would somebody go to school make $19 an hour? Although that's short-lived, this is long-lived. This is a career. So we have to be very careful how we grow the wages, but also what incentives we put there to retain individuals. But also, that's not the first hire. We need to be thinking about the skilling up that person, what opportunity we provide to skill that person up, and also what do we do in terms of the learning cycle of that individual. I started from a community college, okay? I ended up here. I'm very honored and privileged to be here. I have a place at the table that I can talk about my own experiences. But it hasn't been easy. But we have to be able to provide opportunity, not only for skilling up that person, but also during the learning cycle of the individuals, what are they going to do to move up to middle manager, perhaps up to other positions, that they could actually be the connectors for their community, people would see somebody like them, and they can aspire to that position. So I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you. Next, I'll ask Commissioner Hardy to respond.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here on this wonderful, dreary Minnesota morning. But
it's not dreary. Stay tuned for tomorrow.
Stay tuned. He's the energy guy. You know, he has to keep the spark going. But thank you all for being here. Thank you for the invitation to be here, and thank you for your comments. I hear the same things when I go around the state. You know, my agency, the Department of Employment and Economic Development, has two heads. We have the workforce head, and we have the economic development head, and they have never before worked so closely together in these times that we're in. Our economic development folks used to stand by the mantra, the first, the second, and the third most important thing is location, 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 and now it's talent, talent, talent. That's what businesses are saying. That's what our workforce organizations are saying. That's what the continuum of our economy is starving for right now. And so when I listen to the things that you talked about, a couple points that, surfaced for me that I think are very, very critical. You ended your note and you said, not to sound dreary. And I started my note saying it's a jury day. And I think that is a part of where we're stuck, especially when we're talking about communities of color. They have assets. If we don't change the frame and the mindset of how we look at our communities of color, how we look at our low-income communities, how we look at our Native communities, how we look at Minnesotans living with disabilities, we're going to be in trouble. There's assets in those communities, and we have to make sure that we have an asset mindset as we go to solve these challenges. That leads to the other point that you made related to having those courageous and uncomfortable conversations. One of the things that I learned when I moved here from Minnesota, this is the land of 10,000 lakes. This is also the land of 10,000 pilots with not enough airplanes to take them off. We just keep creating pilots. Where in between that starting and that sustaining are we evaluating our programs to have those comfortable and uncomfortable conversations to say, this ain't working? We have to make sure that we're ready to have those types of conversations. And as we think about that from a workforce perspective, a lot of what we were doing in the training area was training for the sake of training and not bringing together that supply and demand, not linking that relationship with the business community so that we can make sure that when we develop training programs that we were actually looking at the want-as to see what was happening, that we were actually talking to our businesses to see where the skills. So always there's a company in Greater Minnesota that's affiliated with Rolls-Royce, and they always say they need welders and not engineers. And so it's making sure we're having those real conversations about what is actually needed, but making sure we're willing to evaluate to do the work. The theme of this breakfast is bridging. And we have to make sure that we are not only bridging our knowledge, but we have to be bridging our programs. The great work that AchieveMpls does, the great work that Step Up does, that Right Track, Urban Scholars, we have to make sure that we are bridging those programs to the next part of our workforce continuum. And so, when we think about internships, we have to make sure that we're being critical about that investment. It's not your grandmother's internship anymore. Don't go and just have a young person file a paper. How are you making sure that they get connected to that real experience? Because you may be investing in your worker in the next 2 years. And if you don't take it serious to do that investment up front, when you have the audience with them, you're going to miss that opportunity, especially in this labor market shortage. You need to make sure that you're investing in that piece. A couple other things related to the work that we have been doing at the state. One of the main things that the governor positioned our administration is that we can't go out and tell people to do something that we're not going to do as the largest employer in the state. And so we have those very, very one-on-one conversations about why does somebody have to lift 50 pounds in order to do X job? Because we've never done the minimum qualifications on these job descriptions in 50 years. Those are the small things that you have to do in order to truly get to those barriers of employment, because that's what they are. They're barriers. And we're in this time where many of our communities are still looked at as emerging. Many of our businesses in those communities are looking at emerging markets. No, they're here. They're here. They're not emerging. And so how are you changing the way you do business? Because I think that's the last piece, that it's not just, it doesn't feel good to do. We have to change the way we do business in order for us to make sure that we can maintain the economy we have today. In Minnesota today, we have about 122,000 open jobs. 122,000. I go around the country and talk to my colleagues. They're like, job creation, job creation. I'm like, don't have that problem. You know, but it's a very scary problem that we do have. It's when I mentioned in terms of my economic development team working even closer with our workforce development team, the fear on my economic development team side is that we don't want to look up and our companies stop innovating. That's scary. That's scary for our overall economy. That's scary for Minnesota in particular. We feed the world. You know, we keep the world organized. We're doing that. And if we stop innovating, that's pretty scary because we don't have the people to put in the seats to do the work. And so we need to make sure that we're working from a place of looking at our assets, having the real conversations about what's working and what's not working. And we also need to make sure that we don't stand on just effort alone. We need outcomes and results. We feel good that we have this great program, we have this great convening, but what are the outcomes and what are the results? Because that is what is going to make us to be able to kind of move this work forward, the work that we have to do to bring together that supply and demand, the work that we're trying to do in our career pathways programs in partnership with City of Minneapolis, our workforce centers around the state, really bringing together employer partners to sit at the table, our education organizations, making sure that we are not building for the sake of building, training for the sake of training, that we're making those connections in real time. And I think that is going to be important for us to figure out how we close these gaps and bridge what we need to do.
Thank you. Mr. Fowke?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everybody, and I think it's going to be a bright day, and the lights are on, so I'll just keep my initial comments to just commenting on what Neel said, because I really thought it was fascinating. A few things really struck me. The supply and demand element of your question, well, are you raising wages? I think that's an interesting topic. I'd love to talk to you maybe offline about it. I had a chance to tour a customer that had a very intense business, and it was basically using semi-skilled labor, and they were just talking, and I asked them about that same kind of question, and they were raising their wages, and you know, the entry position was going from, I think, $15 to $18, and then you could move up from there. But then when we toured the factory, I'm like looking around, I'm like, man, this is hard, dirty work. And I started wondering, you know, is it 18 that would do it? Is it 20? Is it 25? Is it 40? You know, what's the clearing price? And that's a topic that I would love to see more research on. Of course, if the clearing price becomes too high, maybe the jobs all go away, or maybe that encourages automation and you don't get that entry-level job. So there's complications to it. Totally support the idea that we have to let youth know that, you know, technical trades, welding, linemen, these are jobs, good jobs, that can pay a lot of money and you can put food on the table and it's more than a livable wage. And then I was really struck by the last thing you talked about, a law with good intentions. You know, we all know once you have a criminal background how hard it can be to be employed. That law is supposed to fix that, and yet it had an unintended consequence. And I think to your comment, I think we need to look at a lot of our policies and our programs and ask ourselves, good intentions, but were there unintended consequences that came with it? And I think that's a dialogue that we need to have as we move forward. So I'll save my other remarks for the questions that I think will come. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. First of all, if I get too excited talking about education, please forgive me. But basically the remarks that I picked up on was maximizing jobs. And for me, what's interesting about that is it's a great challenge, a great dilemma to be in the middle of. In other words, we have hope to be able to build students to get the skills needed for those jobs that exist. The second thing that looking at is how we have to redesign education. So when we think about how schools were first designed, it was to meet a need of society. So if you think about the 1950s Industrial Revolution, those pieces, the jobs were designed to fit that society. So we have to continue to evolve to meet for jobs that we actually might not know exist yet. And our students have to be able to vision and see themselves in that. So the partnerships are really important, not just the one-off mentorships, but maybe for that 4-year of helping a student be able to navigate through education and talk about those choices. So research does talk about that a student needs to have a mentor outside, another adult outside of their family home. So having a room full of mentors, having kind of a sponsorship conversation of what would it look like if every high school had a business partner who it's not about necessarily getting that job, but getting a job, and making sure that families are a part of that conversation. Because for some families, they are still traumatized by the educational experiences they received or not employed. And therefore, they need to be able to have a conversation with their child about something that they may have limited knowledge on, right? They understand you need to get a job, but what kind? So it's kind of this full circle conversation that we need to be having and being able to make sure that the communities feel that they're a part of that.
Great, thank you. Now I'd like to follow up with some specific questions for our panelists focused on your particular areas of expertise and the lens that you bring into this conversation. I'd also encourage President Kashkari to weigh in as well. And let's start out with Commissioner Hardy. One of DEED's key objectives is preparing Minnesota workers for high-demand jobs in our regional economy. So how does DEED address the specific career and training needs of our young people and the wide education and employment opportunity gaps they are facing?
Thank you. Every day. In partnership, that's how we do it. A lot of the work that happens through our agency is in partnership with our local and county governments, in partnership with our nonprofit organizations and our education institutions. We have really been focused through our state plan on, tackling very clear goals. Our first goal is focused on how do we end income disparities for people of color, for people with disabilities, and our new added goal is focused on gender. The other part of that state plan is really focused on building industry sector partnerships. We, as I mentioned earlier, have, for a while, just trained and not trained in connecting with our business community. And our marquee program is our Pathways to Prosperity program. It's our Career Pathways program, really focused on, I believe, meeting people where they are. And so we're focused on really tackling those barriers to employment. And, not just providing the training dollars, providing those wraparound services. So partnering with our education institutions, making sure that if someone needs a GED, that we start there first. Then going from there to connect them to our nonprofit organizations that do the wraparound services. And what I mean by that, that's focused on our, if you need childcare, if you have a criminal record, how do you navigate transportation? How do you navigate those barriers that get in the way? And then also really focused on getting that, eventually that credential that you need to move through the career and having that business there. That is essential. That it's not the hope that a business will be on the other end to catch that person once they kind of go on the pathway. And meeting them where they are is really focused on, some people have to get on the on-ramp before they can get on the path. And what does that look like? And so how are we making sure that we're doing that? And the only way we're able to successfully do that is in partnership with the organizations that are closer to the community, that know the work. And when you think about that, that continuum related to the education piece, it's investing in apprenticeships and all the way to the 4-year degree. But our focus is that whole continuum. I will say of those 122,000 jobs, most of them don't require a 4-year degree. Being honest about that. But making sure that we provide that choice with real data and real information so that our students and our adults can make those decisions. And we do that only through partnerships with our community and our other governmental organizations. And, you know, the thing that I will say that's important about this when we look at meeting people where they are and addressing those barriers to employment head on is, yes, there's all that work on the front end and ramping up to get someone on that pathway. When they get into that pathway, into that organization, that work also has to start. We have to make sure that when we are putting non-traditional individuals, either from an experience or culture, from a cultural experience, educational experience into a career, that manager and that organization has to be ready for that. You know, we have to make sure that we just don't throw people in with an environment that they're not going to be successful. Those are real conversations from a business community perspective. You can say, yes, we support, you know, this initiative or this policy, and we want, you know, to open our doors to be more diverse. But if it doesn't lead to inclusion and support to be able to move people through, you're just going to have a revolving door. You'll get people in the door, but within a certain amount of time, they're not going to be successful because they're not going to be supported. That takes partnership to make sure we're having those real conversations with our business partners. And so that's the work that we're doing, and really focused on doing that not only just externally as the state agency, but internally as a part of the state government enterprise.
President Dastmozd, St. Paul College, speaking of partnerships, has over 500 industry and community partners. And you mentioned all the different career pathways for students. So in addition to preparing students academically, why is it so important for you to have those connections to the future workforce and the careers?
Well, as I alluded earlier, I think the role of education is to be relevant, but also provide opportunity for somebody to better their life conditions. So we look at the supply and demand, who are our customers, and what are those touch points in terms of that student's journey that they could conclude that they have a meaningful experience and there's a return on investment for them. So that requires us to work very closely with not only community-based organizations, not only with high schools, not only with other entities, but also our business and industry partners who actually are going to hire these individuals, and through their learning and life cycle of learning, they're going to move from point A to point B to point C, and hopefully they get promoted and move up to different ranks within the company, or move across, make lateral moves for opportunities elsewhere. After all, you know, as I said, we have a moral obligation. If you come to us, we have to make sure that you're getting a good return on your investment, not only time, but also the investment, the money you put toward your education. So we have to have a tightly coupled relationship with business industries. And that comes from influence in our curriculum, looking at national standards, looking at faculty training, internship and externship, not only for students, but also for faculty. I can tell you, I cannot bring faculty back during the summer because they're all working. They're working internships. My nurses are working as nurses. The respiratory therapist is working as a respiratory therapist. The machinist is working as a machinist. The automotive technician faculty member is teaching and working in a car dealership. That's how they keep their skills up. But also that's how they can get that web of inclusion between the school and also the industry. So it's very important to make sure that those relationships are maintained, sustained, and we listen to our business and industries, so we don't come up with this narrative. When I first moved to this community back in 2011, I would hear a skill gap. Now I hear a talent gap. So we got to figure out how we can get these planes intersect with each other, and how we are in the middle of all of this thing, but we play a critical role in terms of supplying to the demand of business and industries. And it's just not the president of the college, it's not the vice presidents, it's the faculty. Faculty play a critical role in this thing, because if they don't, we're basically milquetoast, for the lack of a better word. Meaning that we won't have any connections, we won't have any donations of equipment to our programs that would teach individuals based on the relevant equipment. The other part of this whole thing is to do with, as I said, we're a non-traditional institution. when we graduate 1,500 students, the economic impact, just payroll, is 60 to 70 million for that year for the state of Minnesota moving forward. So the state of Minnesota is also benefiting from this through the tax roll. So we play a role in terms of being an economic development engine. So in a bigger picture, not only is it supply and demand, but also it's helping the state treasury, to secure those funds through the taxation. So this role requires us to be actively engaged, because if our students are not graduating, if they're graduating, they're not getting a job, the state of Minnesota is not going to benefit from this tax payroll. I mean, think of it from a system, just kind of a full circle. So it's very important. Not only that, but also we have to be cognizant of the fact what community-based organizations bring to the table. This is a very welcoming, very generous, very gracious community. We have so many community-based organizations that help settle new Americans. That is the future of Minnesota. As Mr. Blazer said, that immigrants will play a great role in workforce shortage. We're in the middle of it when 64% of our students are non-white and many new Americans. This is what Minnesota is going to face. So we better have some tightly coupled relationship, not only with business and industry, but also with community-based organizations. So we can help transition individuals through a meaningful process so they actually feel there's a good return for their investment.
Thank you. Mr. Fowke, Xcel has been a longtime leader in workforce development through its participation in Step Up and as a major employer and partner through the Itasca Project and many other initiatives. Why is it so important for companies like yours to take the lead?
I think it's, excuse me, I think it's important for all businesses to be involved, but if you think about Xcel, we've been serving our communities for over 100 years, and for us to be successful for the next 100 years, I think our communities have to be successful. It's just, the math won't add up. So we need to be engaged, and I think businesses, including Xcel Energy, have some unique things they can bring to the community. I mean, first and foremost, I think it's important that businesses reach out to students through various organizations and inspire them. Let them know that there are jobs out there, because what I have found is kids don't always know that. And then through organizations like Step Up and Bright Track, really step up as a company and allow those high school kids to experience the workplace. I think to your point, make it a meaningful opportunity, not just filing paper. And that takes a little work, but I can tell you the reward is mutual. Our supervisors, our managers, they all have smiles on their faces. One of the best events of the year for me is our end of the summer pizza party. So everybody likes it, the employees like it, and obviously the communities will benefit from that. Those are great organizations. One of the things that we found in our work with Itasca is that, RT's inspiration, I think like 15 years ago to start Step Up, it's put thousands, I think over 10,000 students through these programs, and yet we haven't tracked them afterwards. So what we wanted to do and what we're working on now is something called Connect's MSP Talent. Again, working with RT in his new role and Michael Langley, the greater MSP, and we ask all the businesses here, let's take this database, think of LinkedIn for us, and let's, as the kids move on to technical or college, let's stay connected with them and hopefully hire them right back into our community, because as we've been talking about, we've got a tremendous labor shortage and it's only going to get bigger. I guess the final thing I'd say is when I became CEO 7 years ago, I knew that half of our workforce was going to turn over. And that's a lot of legacy knowledge walking out of the door, but it's also an opportunity to make sure that you have a chance to reshape your workforce for success for the next 100 years. I don't think you can do that without being inclusive. And so we've done a number of things at Xcel, and we continue to learn. I'm a data-driven guy. I want to see the data. But I also know, to Neel's point, it starts from the top. And what I focus on, people tend to focus on. So we're seeing good results. One of the things we've done is you've got to move the hiring process upstream. You can't hire like you did 30 years ago, where the manager gets a stack of applications and picks out the one he likes, often a friend of a friend that he knows or she knows. So we've done a lot of upstream processes to make sure that we are taking that extra step, so you do have diverse candidates to choose from. And we're starting to see the results of that. More to come, much more work to do.
Great, thank you. Ms. Sadler, so we're hearing a lot about partnerships and the opportunities that are available. So, we talk about preparing students to be contributing members of our community. So you had mentioned about redesigning education. So how would K-12, and I'm thinking of secondary specifically, help young people explore these kind of opportunities and career interests?
So one of the terms that we talk about is an early college model. What that means is that you would change your curriculum to have, for example, a career be part of that. So a good example would be like even around education. You would change your courses so that the skills the students are learning are the actual courses they're taking. Therefore, by their senior year, if you will, they would be doing student teaching. By the time they graduate, they would have so many credits towards a teaching degree and end up with either an associate's degree. We actually have a couple of high schools like that. What we would have to also do is to be able to make a connection between all of the academics of the career pathway it would take. So for example, you would need geometry if you're in carpentry, right? And so how do you apply that? Students have to see that the relevance of the work that they're doing. And then finally, looking at an asset-based education system. So when you talk about so many languages that are spoken within our communities, being able to help students understand that is an asset for them. We have, I want to say, over 100 students that are receiving their bilingual seal for the fact that they're able to do that. Now, what would be the next step, and what is the workforce that they could use that talent in? If you haven't talked about that all along, that's why you often hear students by the end of the senior graduation saying undecided. It's because they haven't had a conversation about their assets and where they're placed. And I said finally, but the other part of that is understanding how to give back to your community. So students also are being raised that what they do counts. And so sometimes they're not always sure how they can help out with the job force that's out there and knowing what specifically they need to be trained on to do so. So you not only start in high school, you actually have to build that back down into middle school, pre-K, if you will. So you're giving language and purpose to the curriculum you have. You're also making sure that people realize it's not just about the standardized testing, but every workforce does have some criteria to be able to show that you are able to apply what you've learned from a pre-K-12 educational system. And then the biggest part is the resiliency and the support that students need. Because we build such a great system with pre-K through 12 with supporting students, with having counselors, support staff, nurses, they don't often have that when they leave high school. So how do we create that in the community, within the workforce? How do we truly do what's called onboarding for that? And then how do we help teachers be able to do the same articulation? So if teachers aren't part of this conversation, they also don't know what they're writing their curriculum for, how to be connected, how to make sure that they're experiencing that workplace for what they're building for their students.
Great. President Kashkari, I'm wondering if you have any initial thoughts from hearing what the panelists had to say.
No, I mean, I think their comments resonate with me. I mean, I think they're focused on the right things, and I think we just need to keep at it. So, I mean, I'm pleased to be here. I'm also pleased that they didn't say he's totally wrong, which was a possibility. So thank you.
Great. So I think we just have a few minutes to open to a couple of questions from the audience. So if there is anybody who has a burning question for our panel, please stand. Over here. You're going to have to talk loud.
Okay. My question is about wages and why wages haven't gone up. I remember, I'm old enough to remember when welders and tradespeople were well respected, earning living wages, and those have gone down significantly over the last 20, 30 years. And it seems to me that that really needs to be the starting point.
So the just to repeat it for folks who are watching the live stream, the lady asked, why haven't wages gone up? And thinking about the trades in particular, they seem to be lower than they were in the past. This is something that we're very focused on in the Federal Reserve, trying to understand why wage growth is so low. It's a few things. One factor is productivity growth in the U.S. economy is much lower than it had been in prior decades. And that has to do with technology development and education. And usually wages grow partially related to productivity. So you would expect if productivity growth is lower, then workers would capture fewer gains as well. So that's probably part of it. Another part of it is I still think there's some slack in the labor market. And what that means is the headline unemployment rate, which is now 3.8%, which is quite low, that only captures people who are actively looking for work. When the Great Recession hit, a lot of people were pushed out of the job market and gave up. And so if you look at prime age workers, what economists call prime age, 25 to 55-year-olds, there are roughly 1 million or more fewer people of that age cohort working today than were working back in 2006. So the reason I'm telling you that is that tells me there's probably still slack in the labor market that is not reflected in that 3.8% unemployment rate. There are still more people who I think would like to work if you started to see wages pick up. And so it's a complicated question. We're very focused on it. And the reason we care about it in part is because wages end up driving inflation. And if we saw wage growth take off, you would expect that would lead probably inflation picking up. So that has big economic implications. So it's something we're very focused on. Don't have a perfect answer, but those are some of the components of it.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience?
RT has one.
Oh, RT.
I so appreciated Neel saying we should stop treating all charters the same. Celebrate the great ones and put the other ones out of business. So in that spirit of honesty, could each of you in kind of a quick lightning round say one thing we should do more of and one thing we should stop doing?
For me, I think for us in higher education, we talked a lot about what higher education does, but we did not talk about access. When Neel talked about there's a slack in the labor market, we've done something about it at St. Paul College. We figured it out between ages of 24 and older. There's a lack of participation in the workforce, but also having relevant skills. So we came up with a last dollar model for individuals to bring them back, especially from Ramsey County, especially individuals of color, to be able to get their education without burdening themselves with a loan. So they use their Pell, last dollar they get free education. It's a pilot program. There's about 60 students in there. Average GPA is 3.1. We're trying to scale that up so we can get individuals from that age group to be able to join the workforce market. We can't do everything for everyone. We need to get rid of our lost leaders. So for example, at the college, what we've done is we've gone through a systematic program review and enhancement process that we actually retire some of our programs rather than holding to assets that we can transition those assets elsewhere to get a better return and serve our community better. That's from my viewpoint in higher education.
Great. Commissioner Hardy, what should we do more of and what should we stop doing?
I would say that, I'll sum it up in quickly and then I'll explain. Less Minnesota nice and more Minnesota ice. And what I mean by that is related to these conversations, we have so many of them. We're 101 to death. It's time to move on race discussion. It's time to move on, really bridging the work that is working. And, that is something that we have to get past. We do a great job of that nicety. And I think the other thing that we have to stop doing is not listening to the people we are trying to help. If we don't look around the room, if we don't look around our friend circles, we don't look around our boardroom, and we don't have the people that we are trying to help sitting in those seats, Minnesota nice. The thing that I would say we have to do more of is really being willing to partner and put our money where our mouth is and really invest. Because we can start, as I said, a land of 10,000 pilots and not enough airplanes. We have to make sure that we are investing in those things that work, and that's going to be the thing that takes us to the next level. And those start with those courageous conversations.
Thank you.
Pretty hard to top that. So,
Sunny.
yeah, so more renewable energy coming your way.
I just
No,
raised the
I
stick.
think the comment about, double down on charter schools that works and not the opposite with those that don't work. I think we can apply that, and it takes some courageous conversations, but I think we can apply that to a lot of different things. We are the most charitable community I've ever seen, and I've lived in a few, but not all organizations have equal outcomes. And so we've got to fund those that do. That's kind of what we're trying to do through the coordination of some of these great works like Step Up and Right Track. We've got to make it easier for businesses to get involved. We've got to have those conversations, but there are organizations that aren't producing as much. And we've got to double down on the science. We've got to use the data, and we can't be afraid to use that data to have those courageous conversations. I think from a business perspective, you got to double down on the focus that senior leadership needs to have to change this. I mean, it does start at the top, and you've got my pledge that we'll continue to double down on that. But I think we're in the early days of really understanding our hiring practices, and then once you hire, why is it that we still have more loss of gender and ethnicity than other demographics in the company? So we've got more to learn on that, but we've got to double down on what works.
So basically, we have to help with relevance. So there's cultural relevance, but there's also relevance to connect it to the curriculum that the students need to learn. And what we haven't done is made that tie so clear so that a student realizes this class will get me this skill to get this job, or these classes will lead to these jobs, and here's my choice pick. The less that we have to stop doing is working in silos. We need to have more interdisciplinary, integrated curriculum, but also have the business corporations be a part of that curriculum. So it shouldn't be that they're on the sidelines saying, like, here's how I can help you a mentor, but they're actually in the classroom, co-planning, having conversations, and they're there throughout so that the students and the staff feel that they have a true partnership, but also the students, because they also respond when they know that you care. So when they see that individual that's out there in the workforce, they actually have more of allegiance to that versus when they don't know who that person is and it's an unknown entity. So less siloed org and more integrated.
Great. President Kashkari, final thought.
Well, I said it at the start, so it's hard to pick just one thing, but if I were to pick one thing that I'm aware of is let's be ruthless in assessing what we're doing and shutting down what doesn't work. And a lot of these programs have very good people, but let's be honest, a lot of them are jobs programs for the people who work there. Let's call it what it is. And if it's not actually having the outcomes, let's move the resources to things that are.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much to President Kashkari.